And welcome to Deano Obeidallah Show, sisters and brothers. We're live here Wednesday, April 24th. I'm Deano Obeidallah, and as always, here to be your MBFF. And today I want to talk about the Supreme Court and what happened with the oral argument. And tomorrow, and that's on the abortion case. Tomorrow, by the way, is the huge oral argument in the case of Donald Trump claiming immunity in the January 6th case. So we will cover that tomorrow night. We'll see what happens. I will expect that this Supreme Court is not going to give Trump what he wants completely on one hand, but on the other hand they are, which is going to be delay with an opinion till maybe June or early July, so there's no January 6th trial before Election Day, and that's not because of the Democrats on it, because that's the GOP. And I want to talk about these other issues, but I am so aggravated from what I just saw minutes ago here in New York, and the reporting on Columbia University, and Speaker Mike Johnson is there, and what he was saying about calling the National Guard to silence the pro-Palestinian activists. This is an escalation where there's no need for this whatsoever. There's not violence on the campus. And let me just say, because these protesters are spreading to other schools right now. See it in Texas, in New York. I think you're going to see it. You've seen some in California. In general, from what I've seen, they've been peaceful. But some people, and I read a lot about the Columbia one here, Columbia University, some Jewish students say they feel safe, feel fine. Other Jewish students say they don't feel fine. They don't feel safe. They feel like there's people spewing hate against them. I just want to say at the outset here, just so it's clear for everyone, and for anyone who's an ally of Palestinian humanity, I'll say something that I know you know, but it's important. There is no place for anti-Jewish hate in the support of Palestinian humanity. None. No place. If you're anti-Jewish, please do not support Palestinians because we don't want you on our side. That's not what our movement is about. It's a movement that I was born into because I'm of Palestinian heritage. I didn't have a choice. But the goal has always been the idea of having Palestinians having self-determination. And for me, it's always been about two states, a Palestinian state next to Israel. So for 20 plus years, I do a comedy show with my buddy Scott Blakeman. We did colleges and mosques and Jewish organizations talking about that, doing comedy about it. That's what I've always been about. So what I ask is that there are some people, and this is really for younger people, they don't know sometimes they could be going into the area of anti-Semitism and what they're saying. My advice to them, and if you know younger people, is make it about Benjamin Netanyahu's policies. It's not about the state of Israel. It's not like a state on its own does things. It's the government of whatever nation is what does the actions on behalf of that nation. And when that government changes, it's a vastly different country on the world stage. When Trump was president, vastly different than Barack Obama. George W. Bush was president, vastly different than Bill Clinton. So is it America or is it the leaders of the time? So make your criticism specific to Netanyahu and specific to the policies. For example, Benjamin Netanyahu is objectively committing war crimes. Talk about Netanyahu's war crimes. Talk about the thousands of children that he has slaughtered. Talk about the Christians in a church that he has killed in Gaza. Talk about over 1 million people displaced, collective punishment, which again is a war crime. But don't target Jewish people for their faith. Ever. That's wrong. It's immoral. It's horrific. There's no place for it. And if you think you're helping the Palestinian cause, you're not. You're hurting us. Well, we don't want that. So I just want to say that. Overwhelmingly, the protests I've seen are peaceful. I think look, if you don't like what someone's saying politically, it will make you uncomfortable. You might not feel safe around it. If you're an adult, it's one thing. You can go away from that area. If you're a college student at your campus, I could see your concerns being greater, that you have to go to class and there's people screaming, whatever it might be. I can assure you if it was 100 people waving Israeli flags and chanting about Israel from the river to the sea, which is what Netanyahu and those on the right say all the time, to be blunt, it would be unnerving to Palestinian students or those who support Palestinian self-determination. So I can understand the discomfort. But there's a difference between discomfort, which that's life in a nation that has a First Amendment and free speech. There are things uncomfortable. If it gets into hate, that's different. Gets into threats of violence, that's, of course, illegal. It has to be prosecuted. With that said, let me just be blunt here. The same Republicans who led the demonization of Black Lives Matter, people like Tom Cotton, who literally wrote an op-ed that I reshared for people in 2020 calling for the military to go into the street to put down Black Lives Matter. He put that in writing. Tom Cotton and people like him on the right are doing the same thing today to the pro-Palestinian protesters. And what they're doing is the same playbook, which is they find the most extreme example in an entire movement of people. It could be a massive movement of people who are peaceful, they're going in the streets, but what the right does, find the most extreme person in that movement and then try to define the entire movement by that. That's their playbook. They did it to Black Lives Matter. They're doing it now to the pro-Palestinian protesters. We know their playbook. We understand that the white supremacists of the GOP hate when people of color unite, organize, and especially when there's white allies with us pushing for change. They hate it. It's the greatest threat. It's why, going back, and this is more by analogy, not direct, but after the Civil War, when poor whites and poor blacks were getting together in the South, it scared the wealthy whites, so they gave them Jim Crow to make them feel better about themselves, the poor whites, and divide them from the blacks. Because there's a lot more of us, of people who have humanity and compassion and empathy, than there are of them. So before Mike Johnson went today, Governor Hochul, the governor of New York, publicly said he should stay away. He should stay in Washington. We don't want him here. Governor Hochul, who is very pro-Israel, by the way, but understands that this is not about Israel. This is about the 2024 election and trying to peel away Jewish voters who generally vote for Democrats. And Governor Hochul said today, I think politicizing this and bringing the entourage to put a spotlight on this only adds to the division. And she added, a speaker worth the title should really be trying to heal people and not divide them. So I don't think it adds to anything. And she's right. Mike Johnson went there and said that, again, finding the worst examples he can. And are they true or not? I think they're probably true. From what I've read, the worst examples, people who did spew anti-Jewish hate, were ones off campus, not on campus, because there's some protesting outside, but they will apply it to all to silence all of the people at the campus. But Speaker Johnson said specifically he's going to call Joe Biden and demand the president send the National Guard to Columbia University. It's like the 1960s. At that time, it was an anti-Vietnam War protest. Now it's an anti-Gaza war protest. I will say this, that if you're standing with Speaker Mike Johnson at Columbia or just in the big picture of things, a Trump-backed anti-LGBTQ bigot who wants to erase and criminalize the LGBTQ community, a Christian nationalist, a religious supremacist who is gleeful at imposing religious law to force women against their will to carry a fetus to term, if that's the guy on your side, you might want to rethink your position. That's not who you might want to be standing next to, but if that's who you're standing next to now, it says a lot about you. And I think that's the divide, that you see the far-right voices and some who are on the left, but who are concerned about Israel or concerned about Netanyahu's reign or are truly concerned about anti-Semitism, as I am, and they get sucked into this. And this peddling of misinformation. And we're trying to get a student from Columbia who wrote an article. Now there's a few at Slate and other places as well who's Jewish and said, I'm on campus. I'm part of the protests. In fact, there were Jewish students and Muslim students and Christian students of whatever background celebrating Passover together. They are on the green. Some of the most visible people involved in this movement are Jewish progressive students, generally from the organization Jewish Voices for Peace. We've had some people on our show. And what I find so distressing, and it really cuts through the hypocrisy of those on the right, is that they keep saying the left, the left is spewing anti-Semitism, and they're attacking everyone on the left. And they're not giving examples by name. Like, give us an example by name. And if someone has spewed hate against Jewish students, they should be suspended and ultimately expelled from school if they do it again, whatever the school things are. But we know there's a professor at Columbia University who's a right-wing guy. His name is Shea Davidai. He is targeting progressive Jewish students. Jewish Voice for Peace wrote about it yesterday, put it on Instagram. They say the disgraceful Shai Davidai, publicly called as Judenrat, Jew, rat, capos, and those were people who worked with the Nazis to put the Jews in the Holocaust and literally help them enforce horrific crimes against humanity. And he said to them, this is a professor at Columbia, told these progressive Jews, you're the ones that will be on the last train to Auschwitz. And they made a public complaint, said, we do not feel safe with this professor still teaching on our campus, having access to the Jewish community spaces we cherish, much less portraying himself as the valiant protector and spokesperson of Jews on campus while insulting our ancestors' memory, saying that the students involved on Jewish Voice for Peace, almost every one of them have lost family members in the Holocaust. And there is this despicable right-wing professor demonizing progressive Jews, invoking the Holocaust, saying you're like people who are Nazis, who killed the Jews. And these are proud Jews that he's attacking. And not only are they not denouncing him on the right, he was on Fox News a short time ago. I can't believe it's surreal to watch this. Like, I'm losing my mind. I'm like, how do you elevate this scumbag who is targeting progressive Jewish students? And the reason is because these people on the right don't care about Jews. They care about the right wing. So he's in their club. He's right winger and he's fine. He can do it. But they'll take some tweet from someone on the left like, oh, Congressman Omar said this thing, not about this, but in the past, and demonize our left over and over and over. When you have a guy here who's targeting Jewish students on the Columbia campus, making them feel, I'm reading in writing their complaint that they posted publicly, we don't feel safe with him on campus, and nothing. How could you allow a professor to bully and taunt progressive Jewish students? There can't be a divide on anti-Semitism, on anti-Jewishness. It's the same thing. If it's done by a progressive against Jews, then it's wrong. And if it's done by a conservative professor on video, he should be gone. For the life of me, I don't understand any of this. And I understand it when I take a step back. It's the worst form of politics. It is the worst type of politics. It is divisive politics. It is like Governor Hochul said. And again, she didn't say, Mike Johnson, don't go there to stand with the Jewish students. She was just there. She's been very outspoken against anti-Jewish hate. But she knows what's going on, and we know what's going on here. And this is building, and what they're hoping, I guess, on the right is that at some point there really is violence, and then they can define the whole movement just like they did to Black Lives Matter. And the lie over and over, how much did we hear 2020? And then they used their demonization of Black Lives Matter to demonize George Floyd. To demonize George Floyd, who was murdered we all watched him be murdered brutally. A man who cried out for his mother. And they smeared him with lies on Fox News. And Tucker Klansmen and others. And they're heading to this now. And this is, I know it's the right. I think what's troubling to me is that there's some on the left, not many, some on the left joining with them. Generally, I understand, believe me, I come at this whole conflict a different place than some of my friends. I come at this conflict as someone always trying to find a way, not in this feel-good mode, let's just have a kumbaya fest, but to really bring people together, because my belief is that if we can, then my family, my cousins, and it was my uncles when they were alive, but my cousins who live under a military occupation in the West Bank, maybe one day will have the freedoms we take for granted. That they can dream, and it's not cruel to dream, because yes, they can go to work or go to school and not have to worry about a checkpoint being closed because some Israeli soldier just doesn't want to open it, and it becomes personal for whatever reason. And I also sincerely believe that Israeli mothers and Palestinian mothers should not worry for their children when they go out to be killed by a missile or a militant. This is what I've been about for decades. It's not new. This is where I am. So all of my work has always been trying to bring people together on this issue. And I've always talked to people in my community and say, some people don't get the emotional involvement in this. And I make that plea to those who are on the side of Palestinian humanity and on the side of defending Israeli action, is that on both sides, people who are Jewish, they have a connection by faith and sometimes family, and those like myself who are Palestinian, we have a connection by family. It's not by faith. Palestine's not a religious state. There's hundreds of thousands of Christians, and millions of Muslims. So it's not a religious state. But the point is family. So that be respectful. I always implore people who want to talk about this issue on my community or otherwise. I've done so much interfaith work with Jewish advocates and activists, and some even liberals don't get it. I'm like, this can't be like the normal political debate. It can't be about scoring points. It has to be about not being about one side or the other, about pro-peace, pro-humanity, pro-compassion. And I don't mean, again, naively, but towards the end of really getting to a two-state solution so that Palestinian Christians and Muslims can have self-determination and Israeli Jews can have self-determination. And that the threat of violence is no longer a daily event. And I don't know if in my lifetime we'll get to that, but what we're seeing now is we're seeing an escalation of the right. We see them now weaponizing hate, threatening to use the National Guard. And it's heartbreaking to see this play out the way it is. It's not going to do anyone any good in the long run. And while all of this is happening, in the region that we should really be focused on what's happening to change policy there, this week alone, Netanyahu's military has killed in excess of 100 civilians, children, women, mothers. I saw a story I shared 2 days ago of a woman and her family all killed. The only one that survived was she was pregnant. They were able to deliver the baby even though she had died. A newborn baby and one other child. They were killed. There was another thing I played on Friday, just a week ago, where children playing in a refugee camp in Gaza during the day, playing at a foosball table, missile strike by Netanyahu's military. No investigation, nothing, just dead children. CNN happened to have camera people there who recorded right afterwards of the children on the ground dead and going to the hospital and talking to the families and showing them on camera. It was unbelievably moving. And meanwhile, in the West Bank, where my family is, now you have Netanyahu confiscating more land to build more settlements and more military action going on. And that's getting no press. I would rather that be the coverage than arguments over protests. But it's all about distraction. And this is where we are. So we're at this weird place that you can feel the tension building in reading what people are saying. And the voices that want to bring people together are drowned out by the extremists who are amplified by Republicans and right-wingers. And what was really sad was that, we're seeing a divide within the Jewish community that's getting uglier, too. And so much of the Jewish community is the Democratic base. 70% Jewish Americans, just ironically enough, Muslim Americans, same percent, 70% vote Democrat. That I saw today, Congressman Moskowitz from Florida, who's a pretty progressive guy, strong supporter of Israel. I understand it. He's Jewish. He has the connection of his faith and family. But attacked Bernie Sanders today on Twitter because Bernie was criticizing Netanyahu. And when you have a Jewish congressman attack a Jewish senator online, and they're both Democrats, you're like, this is about to fracture out of control and splinter the Democratic base, making it impossible for us to defeat Donald Trump in 2024. That's where this is going to lead to. Whatever problems I have with Biden on Gaza do not eclipse my concerns for all the other communities in our coalition. And things are changing for the better. And Biden's, when his policy matches his rhetoric, I'm even happier. But the Democratic Party is changing. And that's why we need to win as a party. It's not Biden versus Trump. It's our values, our democratic values, versus MAGA, despicable, white supremacist, anti-democratic, fascist values. So it really concerned me to see Congressman Moskowitz on Twitter mocking Bernie Sanders. And I'm hoping, and I tweeted for what it's worth, that this is both despicable and disheartening, and that I hope Congressman Moskowitz will apologize to Senator Sanders, and that we don't fracture our base any further. Because everything I do is goal-oriented here, and it's about winning in 2024 is my number one priority in my life from now to November, because the stakes are that high. So we can't fracture our party. We have to be respectful to fellow Democrats, even if we disagree around the edges. We're not going to meet MAGA. I'm not going to meet conservatives even halfway on policy. But for conservatives who aren't MAGA, we will join together in defense of our democracy. We are all patriots. It's something I've talked about so many times on the show. That if you're a conservative and you don't like Trump and you reject MAGA, you're welcomed here, even though we don't agree on policy. Because you're an American patriot. You put our democratic republic first, over Donald Trump, over loyalty to a wannabe fascist leader. But it's really, I wasn't around during the 60s Vietnam protests. I have no idea, but I will tell you, yesterday I was doing research on the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where our convention is going to be this year. It's just odd, history's lining up and mocking us here. And in 1968, for those who remember or saw, and I saw documentaries and movies afterwards, there were massive anti-war protests, anti-Vietnam War protests. And it became the story. And according to political scientists looking back and historians, the chaos around the Democratic Convention in Chicago helped Richard Nixon win and defeat the Democratic nominee Hubert Humphrey, who had been vice president, because LBJ chose not to run because the Vietnam War was weighing him down. So the issue with the Middle East is not going to go away until there is a cessation of violence, completely like a permanent ceasefire. You can blame whoever you want for why we're not there. And then President Biden and Democrats doing what they can to rebuild Gaza, help the Palestinian people. Obviously, we're already helping Israel. President Biden just today signed $15 billion in military aid for Israel. It passed the Senate last night. He signed it. Also about $2 billion in humanitarian aid for the people of Gaza. That's a very important. That's a lifeline. So now it's law. It's going to go to them. It won't go through the UN Relief Works Agency, but it's going to go to them, and that provides a great deal of help. That's important. So, look, I was going to talk more about the abortion stuff that's going on. But if you want to chime in and talk about this, I'm all ears, because it is heartbreaking for me to see what is going on. This is spinning ugly. It's getting out of control. My heart breaks for the Jewish students who are truly feeling demonized and unsafe on their own campus. And for some of it, it's because of some amount of anti-Jewish hate. Then I've seen numerous articles I've mentioned. Other Jewish students go, we're fine, we're part of this movement. That's not going on. But for still some, there's definitely a sense of not feeling safe on their own campus. And that has to be very unnerving. And there has to be a balance, though, when it comes to free speech. I don't mean hate speech. I mean political speech. Unless you're going to ban everything. You're going to ban all the Israeli flags, all the Palestinian flags. No one could talk about the Middle East conflict. It seems like a bad thing to do at college. I think college is about having these robust debates, having it respectful as possible, but passionate. And in a passionate issue that you're emotionally connected to, it could be triggering. And if you're older, you've been through a lot, you can have a thicker skin. If you're 19 or 20 and this is jarring, you've never seen this in person, it could be frightening and scary. So it's all a balancing. Our First Amendment's all about balancing. It has to fall on the side of free speech. I'm such a believer in there's speech you don't like, you counter it with more speech. You don't silence speech you don't like. Not on this show, though, for the MAGA people who want to call. I'm talking about in real world out there, because there's no First Amendment here. This is Sirius XM. But for everywhere else. So, all right, so let's take a break and come back. We'll see if people want to talk about this. I'm all ears. If not, I'll go through some of the abortion stuff I want to talk about today. There was a really compelling oral argument on Republicans. Mike Johnson, especially the group that he used to work for, a hate group, by the way, Alliance for Defending Freedom, as Southern Poverty Law Center has designated them a hate group. That's what Mike Johnson used to work with. They were part of this, and Republicans literally are fighting to ensure that in Republican states, they don't have to comply with federal law when it comes to saving the life of a woman if it has to involve an abortion. They want to have the right to kill a woman as opposed to give her an abortion in a timely manner. Because the way the Republicans want it, the only time an abortion should be allowed is if a woman is literally on the doorstep of death. And that was a whole argument today with the federal law, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, EMTALA. Unreal. There's so much about this time I can't believe we're living through. This is one of them there. So let's take a break and come back. We'll reset. We'll regroup. If people want to call about the protests, I'll take the calls. If not, I will go to this that I had all set up to talk about. Be right back after this.